This week we're looking at horticulture and orcharding. These land uses tend to be quite intensive and labour intensive, and so they often use smaller parcels of land, and because of the delicacy, the volumes and the demand for these products, or engaged in these products, they historically have been located closer to their markets, and so often horticultural and orchard land has been close to cities and towns. It's not quite so much the case with a lot of orcharding, which often is very precisely located due to climate and in some cases soil, but mainly climate kind of influences. Those connections tend to have been broken in recent times because of improvements in transport and storage, particularly the use of refrigeration. Overall, though, it still tends to be very intensive, again, both in terms of the product per area and the amount of labour. And so that puts a particular character onto these land uses. Basically, you can earn a living off a smaller amount of land. There's been a lot of technological improvements too, and we include some of that in the study guide. Things like greenhouses is pretty traditional, but now when we're moving into the world of hydroponics and large-scale hydroponics, we're seeing almost a factory-like production for a lot of our vegetables in particular, but also to a certain extent fruit and so on. And this is still an evolving area, so watch this space very much. And if you find yourself working in this area, it's very important that you keep yourself abreast of technological developments in the area. Now, with the improvements in storage and transport, horticulture and orcharding is able to be largely disconnected from their markets, and so we're finding a wide distribution across those areas of Australia that have the basic raw materials of climate and soils and so on. You'll find details of that in the study guide. When we look at the kind of crops, the products, they tend to be things that are very much a part of our daily diet, and therefore there is a constant demand for them. And so either they're grown in such a way that they can be produced all year round, say using greenhouses, or they're produced and then refrigerated, which we find with a lot of our fruit, say apples, oranges and so on. And so this infrastructure becomes more of an issue. The infrastructure is not so much to do with bulk in the way, say, that it would be with wheat and broad acre cropping and so on. It has more to do with specialist ways of transporting these relatively delicate products and high value products to their destinations. And most of you will be aware that this improvement in transport also has opened up international markets, but also international competition. And so it's not uncommon to go down to your local supermarket and find on the shelves fresh fruit and vegetables coming pretty much from the other side of the world. And that's competing with our own industry. And so it's another place where our rural economics is being more and more influenced by factors of globalization. This does not diminish the importance of the industry. There are also a number of innovations. Apart from technology, we've also got innovations and developments in terms of demand. There is greater focus on health consciousness. There is a pushback from the industry. We've got the whole question of genetically modified foods and so on coming in around the edges. And to a certain extent, there is always the concern about the environment and sort of changes whether or not they are impacting the industry in a material way. One thing about working in this area as a valuer is that you need to be very, very sensitive to the micro-locational issues. Microclimate, issues of soil and so on, topography can be extremely important in the area of horticulture and orcharding, to the extent that you can have orchards being able, or some types of intensive production, say bananas for example, in some places where they get a bit marginal. It'll be one side of the hill and not the other, even though the climate appears to be the same. A little bit more shade or a little bit less frost and so on can make the world of difference. And so these things you need to watch out for if you're valuing this area. It's one of the many places, virtually all of our rural valuation, you have to be very aware of what's happening in the industry, both in terms of technology, but also in terms of markets. When we get down to the valuation issues, the normal observations of climate, soils, topography, absolutely basic. Looking at the product itself, how the industry is set up, what infrastructure is available, whether there is cool rooms and so on available, other specialist production issues, and they are almost as varied as the crops themselves. And talking to people who are in the industry, what would someone buying the property who is going to be coming in to run this business is going to be looking for? What are they going to need? Where is the obsolescence and the value of all that infrastructure? Very, very important issues. When we're looking at horticulture, it's typically valued in terms of value per hectare, and especially value per productive hectare. And so the difference between productive land and marginal land, or land that is under the infrastructure, all needs to be taken into account. When we're looking at orchards, the rate or the value per tree and the condition of trees and so on is usually the standard that most orchardists are conscious of, and so the area available is relevant. But the value per tree is something that you should at least use as a check approach, if not as your primary focus. The condition of the trees is important in orcharding. Likewise, the condition of the crops in general, and things like soils, what needs to be done to the soils, what needs to be done to the soils to get them into an acceptable quality and so on, is important for the valuer to have an eye on. When we're looking at really intensive horticulture, say in the area of hydroponics, which is probably one of the fast growing areas of technological innovation, very, very intensive, it means that many of the normal variables in farming are taken out of the equation. The valuer has to be familiar with the technology and the state of the art really in this area, and that's very much a place where it's important to watch this space, because our hydroponics industry is turning horticulture into something more like a large-scale, highly productive factory. Now, when we look at this, there are going to be emerging methods. The comparables, rate per hectare, rate per tree, and so on, and looking at product is beginning to be replaced, or at least challenged, or augmented is probably a better term, by income concerns, because especially when you look at horticulture on large scale, it is very much a business, a factory, and so the financing is starting to look like more manufacturing finance and so on, and therefore the value can be looked at in those terms as well. Now, this is only an emerging issue. Currently, most horticultural projects are done using, if you like, traditional methods, but through your careers, you'll probably find that some of the skills you learn in advanced evaluation will be especially useful in this area. For those people who are able to take an interest in horticulture and orcharding, say for your assignment and so on, you'll probably find this is a particularly interesting area, a bit of a niche still compared to the broadacre land uses, the cattle industry and things like that, which are very much what people think of when they think of Australian rural production. but that's not to say it's not interesting and certainly very productive and so on. So it's an area certainly to take seriously. Also for people seeing themselves working in the valuation area in urban areas, it's also useful to be familiar with this land use, because often still horticulture and so on is out there just on the edge of town very often, or at least those places that aren't being turned into new subdivisions and so on. And for that matter, when you're looking at these fringe uses, you've got unusual rural industries that have something of this quality, such as turf growing and so on like that. I hope you enjoy the module, especially the study guide. By now you'll have noticed that we're getting well into the textbook, and you'll notice pretty much that the textbook follows a different pattern to the modules and our study guide, and this is because the textbook is really covering rural valuation as a concept, as a set of theories, and it's very, very important that you read it. While the textbook tends not to talk so much about the individual land uses, which is one of the reasons why we put the study guides together and go through them industry by industry, so you've got more of an on-the-ground feel, if you like. The textbook is important for that global idea. So in this module, we're looking at chapter 7, and that takes us through a number of important background issues and so on. Things like the sort of the hobby farms and irrigation and so on, which bear on this topic particularly, but also get you to look at it from, if you like, a bird's eye view, so taking a little bit of a step back from the immediate. So whatever you do, make sure you spend a bit of time in the textbook as well, and that's pretty much the case for all of the modules. That it's important that by the time we get to the end of our unit, the textbook is very familiar. You've read it pretty much cover to cover.